the center on budget and policy priorities. This is what they show. The 2001 and 2003 tax cuts added about $1.7 trillion to deficits between 2001 and 2008. And over the next decade, you want to leave them in? Making the tax cuts permanent would cost $4.4 trillion. Joining me now is Curtis Dubé, a senior policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation. Mr. Dubé, good to have you with us tonight. Do the extension of these tax cuts, the position of the Heritage Foundation, do the extension of these tax cuts create jobs?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I shouldn't say they create any more jobs. These are policies that have been in place for a decade now.
Well, wait a minute. What is it? Either they create jobs or they don't. You just contradicted yourself. If we extend the Bush tax cuts here, will it create jobs?
It will prevent jobs from being destroyed.
But it won't create jobs, right? I'm talking about job creation.
We're not changing the tax code. This is the tax policy that's been in place for a decade now. We're not cutting taxes. We're keeping in place the policies that have been there for a decade. If we increase taxes, we will destroy jobs.
No. We're not increasing taxes. We would be following the law that the Republicans passed. Did they not pass it?
Well, they passed it under reconciliation, which we learned so much about during the health care debate.
But they did pass it.
What matters is what's current policy.
The Republican majority passed the Bush tax cuts, correct?
It doesn't matter who passed it or when it passed.
If you can't answer that, Mr. Dubé, come on now. Who passed the damn law? Was it the Republicans or the Democrats? It was passed under reconciliation
in 2001,
It was the Republicans. And now the Republicans want to go back and change the law they passed. Is that correct?
No, the current policy has always been to...
It's not a policy, it's a law. It's a law. Now be honest about this.
The current tax system expired because it was passed under budget reconciliation laws.
By the Republicans.
But that's a quirk in law.
Wait a minute.
It was passed under reconciliation.
Wait a second here. You got to get over. This is what the Heritage Foundation does. I'm trying to give you a chance to be correct on the figures here. The Republican majority passed the taxes. The Republican majority passed the Bush tax cuts. It had a sunset date, correct? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Now the Republicans are trying to change the sunset date, correct?
No, they're trying to keep the tax system that's been in place for a decade now and prevent a massive tax increase.
No, but they have to change the sunset date.
Forget the sunset date. They're trying to make it permanent,
if we can't have
an
honest conversation, Mr. Dubé, you got to be. If you want to call it a tax increase, that's fine. But the law is going to expire, and that law was made under Republican reconciliation, and now they're coming back trying to change that. Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. I appreciate that. It took me a few minutes to get to that. All right. Now, the next thing is, it's about job creation in this country. Okay. If we do change this, if the Democrats cave in and go ahead and change this, the law that the Republicans made, will it create jobs?
Well, like I said before, it's not going to create new jobs because this is the tax policy that's in place. But if we allow them to expire and the taxes to increase, we will destroy jobs.
Okay. All right. So you just admitted that there's no guarantee that if we allow the top 2% in this country to continue on with the tax breaks that they have, that it's going to create any more jobs. Which undoubtedly,
but you're missing what I said.
If you do what you want to do,
it destroys lots of jobs.
I heard exactly what you said.
We're trying to prevent a massive tax increase, job-destroying, economy-slowing tax increase. Not arguing that extending current policy will create jobs. I'm arguing that if you allow the tax cuts, the tax is to increase, we will have a lot fewer jobs.
Okay. Good to have you with us, Mr. Dubé. Appreciate your time tonight. For more, let's bring in Democratic strategist Bob Shrum. He's also a professor at New York University. If the Republicans can convince me that they will create jobs, a guarantee, and not have a theory, heck, I'd go along with it. I'm in the top 2%. Bob Shrum, what's the argument here for the Democrats?
Look, listening to Curtis, you got to think, if you were a Republican, you probably shouldn't be talking about job destruction outside a confessional because they've set a world record at it. We know what the Bush tax cut did and didn't do. We know that for 2.5 years after it was passed, there was no new job creation. We know there was a total of 3 million jobs created during all the Bush years compared to 23 million under Bill Clinton. We know that the Congressional Budget Office says that of the 11 possible things we could do to help the economy, extending the Bush tax cut for people at the top finishes dead last. It's less than 1/5 as effective as passing on employment compensation extension or investing in infrastructure. infrastructure. This isn't about economic policy. This is about a right-wing ideology of comforting the comfortable and coming up with any excuse possible to pass a tax.
The Democrats say, well, we would like to extend the Bush-era tax cuts for middle class, but those right. Evil, successful people at the top 3 or 4 or 5%, the so-called rich Americans, we're going to continue to tax them at a higher rate.
Between 2001 and 2007, 66% of income growth in the United States went to the top 1% of Americans. Meanwhile, the bottom 50% of income earners own less than 1% of the country's wealth. One of the major reasons for the growing gap is corporations outsourcing jobs to foreign labor markets who will work for pennies on the dollar. In China, a garment worker, well, makes 86 cents an hour. You want to work for that? In Cambodia, it's 22 cents an hour. Compare that to the U.S. federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. That is what American workers are up against in bad trade agreements, and it's killing the middle class.
What's happening with the top 1% of earners in our country? As you said, they grabbed 2/3 of the rise in income. They own 83% of all stock owned by Americans. 83%. They keep getting richer, and these trends actually really began under Ronald Reagan. It's amazing to look at the history. You go back, 1981 is the beginning of record debts, tax cuts for the rich, family income drops, income inequality soars, and you also see household savings down, household debt up, which is how we wound up in this crash. So these are trends that the Republicans brought on. You see these graphs, there's a little bit of improvement under Bill Clinton, and then everything goes back to the plunge of the middle class when George Bush takes over. It's crystal clear. You can see it on, on graphs, and it's just not something that's well known by the American people while we're being pitted against each other by Republicans.